Hi, I'm Ian. Welcome to ReFresh. If you don't know much about ReFresh, maybe I can just set the scene for you. ReFresh, we meet every fourth Sunday, so that's once a month in St Margaret's Church, Ifield, Crawley, at 9:30 AM. And it's fair to say within the context of St Margaret's, ReFresh is a different way of doing church. And in the context of ReFresh, we're online during this COVID lockdown period. This is our third online edition. And online via YouTube, it's a different way of doing ReFresh. So I hope you enjoy this morning or this evening or this afternoon, whenever you're watching this edition. I'm going to be helped out by Sue and Varian.
Hi, I'm Sue. Welcome to this month's ReFresh.
Good morning, I'm Varian and today I'll be doing the reading.
Our theme for this ReFresh, well, what is our theme? I was trying to work out how to introduce this. I was going to say it's Jesus and his women, and that doesn't quite sound right, does it? And then I thought maybe, well, what's the problem with women? But that doesn't sound right either. I could say women, they're a bit tricky, aren't they? That's not right, is it? So I haven't quite got the theme, but it's certainly something to do with Jesus and something to do with the women in the Bible. So I hope that's enough for you to be going on with. One thing we do embrace at ReFresh is the fact that we think Jesus loves us all. He loves us as we are, and his grace is amazing. And we're going to start by singing Amazing Grace.
Grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see. The Lord has promised good to me, his word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. Yes, when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life of joy and peace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine. But God who called me here below will be forever mine. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I
Some of you may remember back in April we were looking at Psalm 23, and Sue invited people to contact us with their own versions of Psalm 23, and last month we had Rob Pudney reading his, which was fantastic. Thank you, Rob. This month Ines Manning has been in touch. She's also written a version of Psalm 23, and here is Ines reading that to us now.
The Lord encompasses me with his love. He sends his angels from above. Even when I stray, he is there guarding me, caring for me, providing for my needs. He wants the best for me. Though I come into turmoil and conflict, he is there, protecting me and encouraging me, loving me and surrounding me.
Thank you, Ines. That was great, wasn't it? Feel free to interact with us in any way via Facebook, ring us up, send us messages via the church website, however you want to get in touch. If you've got a version of Psalm 23 or something you want to contribute to a future edition of ReFresh, we're always happy to hear from you, and we'll do our best to incorporate something of you into one of our ReFresh services at some point.
Today's reading comes from Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped. She felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. At once, Jesus realised that the power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother with this teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anybody follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out and took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went into where the child was, he took her by the hand and said to her, "Talath kumen," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Thank you. So that reading, there's two stories really, aren't there? There's Jairus and his daughter, and whether Jesus is that fussed about going to heal her, and while he's sort of seemingly prevaricating, the daughter dies, and then Jesus actually does go and heals her. He brings her back to life, which is like a miracle story. But the other story, I thought, in some sense, is more interesting, about the woman who's been bleeding for 15 years, and then she goes out into the crowd, and she doesn't want to make a fuss. She just touches the hem of Jesus' garment, with believing that that would heal her, or might heal her. And then Jesus notices that that has happened. What's that story all about? That's interesting, isn't it? What is that all about?
Well, it was very important because Jesus' encounter with that woman was the reason he delayed going to see Jairus' daughter, and the reason she died. And I think it's understanding the situation the woman was in. I mean, the poor lady, she'd been bleeding, the story says she'd been bleeding for 15 years. Can you imagine what that must have been like, especially in Jesus' day when there were no modern sanitary protections? So, she couldn't go out.
So she shouldn't be out?
Well, she shouldn't be out because technically she was unclean according to Jewish law. But also, she wouldn't want to go out because she wouldn't know how heavy her bleeding was going to be. And she was desperate. I suppose she'd heard the stories about Jesus healing people, and she wondered whether Jesus could do anything for her. But I guess, because she shouldn't be out in public, she wouldn't want to go up to him and ask him to heal her. So she just touches his garment.
So she's taking a big risk.
She's taking a very big risk.
Someone might spot her, see her, smell her, whatever, or just realise that she's not supposed to be out.
Yeah.
So she's taking that risk. And then Jesus turns around and notices her. And at that point, she must have been really quite scared then.
Oh, yeah, she must have been terrified, that Jesus would tell her off, bring attention to her, and I think
just publicly shame her.
Publicly shame her, yeah. And I think it's very interesting because Jesus says, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples' reaction is interesting because they say, "All this crowd is pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?"
Yeah. What are you on about? There's millions of people here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you idiot.
And yet, the woman. There must have been something different in the way the woman touched Jesus. I suppose it was out of desperation, out of her need to be healed, out of faith, I suppose. And she touched him, and I think the Bible reading says that Jesus felt some of his power going out of him. Because her faith she knew immediately, I suppose, that she'd been healed, and Jesus knew that someone in need had touched him.
And Jesus is able to distinguish that this is like one of those holy moments. There's something really significant happening here for someone, and the fact that some young girl might be dying a few steps away. I know he then knows that he can go and heal her and raise her from the dead, but in some respects, he's just recognising this is a moment, isn't it?
Yes. That this woman is in need. That Jairus' daughter is in need, but this woman is in desperate need. She's suffered enough for 15 years, and she wants to be well. And interestingly, Jesus doesn't. She steps forward nervously. It says in the text that she was frightened, and she came and fell at his feet and told him what she'd done. So she was honest with Jesus, and he loved her. He says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, you have been healed." How wonderful is that? And I wonder it doesn't say what the reaction of the crowd was, but what they felt. But that woman, she must, for the first time in 15 years, she was clean according to Jewish law, and she didn't have to suffer the pain and the indignity of bleeding every day. It's a lovely story, lovely encounter between Jesus and a woman.
And another thing that interests me, and it's that encounter with women thing that it's threaded throughout the gospel readings in the Bible about Jesus and women. And we all know, don't we, that the church has had a problem with women over the years, and that's a whole other sort of episode of ReFresh, I'm sure, somewhere. But Jairus is not just some bloke, is he? Jairus is an important guy. In fact, does it say who he is?
I think he was the leader of the local synagogue. So actually he was taking a risk, asking Jesus to heal his daughter.
But he's an eminent, important religious figure, and yet what Jesus does, and he does this a number of times in the Bible, is he actually has an encounter with a woman, and at the time, I think it's clear, isn't it, that there are other women that Jesus has encounters with. Jesus is a guy who's operating in a time when women are largely behind the scenes. They're not treated as equal, they're not really independent in their own right. So the fact that Jesus, a single guy, a religious leader, he's like a rabbi figure, isn't he? Encounters women and has meaningful conversations with them, quite often on his own. There's this story about the woman, this is in a public place, obviously, but there's an encounter that Jesus has with a woman at the well, where she's, out in the midday sun because she's not really a figure that people want to be seen with, and she's, someone who's had a number of different husbands, and she's living with a guy, and she's what they would have thought was no better than she ought to be. So she has to go out in the middle of the day, in the height of the midday sun, to get her water, because that's the only time she can run the risk of, she can sort of avoid the risk of running into people, she thinks. And yet Jesus stops and has an encounter with her, a meaningful encounter. And he does this again and again, doesn't he? I mean, what do you make of the way that Jesus encounters women?
I think in this story, the one, going back to Jairus and the woman who was bleeding, it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus put the needs of a woman who was marginalised because of her condition above the needs of the leader of the synagogue. He's not afraid to do that. And in the encounter with the woman in the well at Samaria, again, he's not afraid to sit and talk to her. The woman was also a Samaritan, and Jews didn't talk to Samaritans. If you had to make a journey that required you to go through Samaria, you did a detour to avoid going through Samaria. So, Jesus is speaking to this woman who, as you say, has had many husbands and is, I suppose, regarded as the village slut. He talks to her and he asks her for a drink of water, and he's not afraid to have a conversation with her, and in that conversation he gently challenges her about the way she's living her life. He doesn't condemn her, but he just challenges her, and they have a conversation about whether there's a better way of living. The conversation centres around living water, the water from the well that she has to draw every day because the water runs out, but the water Jesus can give her is living water, so she'll never be thirsty again. And she says, "Sir, give me this water." So, at the end of that story, there's a sense that her life has been changed through meeting Jesus, and that he's challenged her and she wants to change. And I think that happens in so many other stories in the Bible. Jesus meets people at their point of need, meets the most marginalised at the point of need, gently challenges them and changes their life. Lepers, disabled people, children, they're welcome to Jesus. Children were kind of at the margins of society, but Jesus says, "Come to me like a child." Everybody is welcome. I think that's what this story is about, that Jesus meets us where we are, in our point of need, meets that need, and then sets us free, I suppose, to be the people he wants us to be.
I wonder whether we quite get that, and I sometimes wonder, whether the wider church gets that, or wants to get that. And I was thinking, actually, just while you were talking that there's some stories with Jesus, and what Jesus does is encounter women who, society would want nothing to do with and want him to have nothing to do with, and whether that's, a woman who's been bleeding for 15 years, or maybe the village sort of slut type woman, that woman who was being stoned for adultery, the prostitute who came and poured ointment on Jesus' feet and then washed his feet with her hair. These are characters that Jesus looks at and he sees them for who they are. Who they are created in God, and he loves them as they are, and yes, he's keen to sort of see them changed and moved on, but that's not a barrier to him encountering with them.
No, not at all.
And yet at the same time, the church sort of does the opposite thing, which is it seems to sometimes take good people, good women. I'm thinking of something like Mary Magdalene, and sort of conflates them. So Mary Magdalene's a character that, in some respects, she was a wealthy woman. Jesus probably his ministry was being paid for by her at an important point in his life.
Some theologians think that.
She may well have been, in some respects, one of the key disciple figures and maybe one of his founders of the church. And yet it's not long before that story gets conflated with, Mary Magdalene, she's that prostitute, isn't she? And so Jesus sees women as they are in God, and yet society is still, as we know, quick to marginalise people and do them down or slur them or tarnish them. And yet, again and again, what we learn from the way Jesus deals with women in the Bible is that he elevates them.
And Mary Magdalene is one of my favourite women characters in the Bible. I think in all the Gospels, the women are the first to the tomb on the first Easter Sunday. So they're the ones who discover that Jesus is risen from the dead. And there's that lovely story in John's Gospel where Mary Magdalene's gone to the tomb, discovered it's empty, and she's crying because she doesn't know where Jesus is. And she sees this figure, and she's crying so much that she can't make out who the figure is. And this figure asks her, "Why are you crying?" And she thinks he's the gardener and says, "If you've taken him away, can you tell me where you've put his body?" And then he says her name, Mary, and she recognises him immediately and falls at his feet. And I think it's just such a lovely story that Jesus calls her by name, and he does that. I think he does that to each of us. He knows all. The Bible says he knows us by our name, and he calls us by name. And as you said, he meets us at our point of need. He knows what we're going through. We can trust him, and that he'll never reject us, never let us down. Might challenge us about things, but he will always love us.
So we might have people tuning into this ReFresh YouTube edition who don't normally come to church, may have issues with the church, may have heard things about the church. They might be looking and thinking, so why does the church have a problem with women then? What can we say into that space? And by that I'm thinking, we've been very slow, haven't we, to let women have positions of leadership in the church, and women's vicars, they've arrived in our lifetime. Women's bishops, they're still quite novel, aren't they? So what do we say to people who say, yeah, but it's easy for you to say this, Jesus elevates women, but maybe the church isn't, maybe women don't feel that the church is a place where they feel elevated.
I think it's a challenge, isn't it? Not just for women, but, nowadays there are other people who perhaps don't feel welcome in church. Gay people.
Yeah, well, we say you're loved as you are and everyone's welcome. Do we really mean you're welcome to come, and then what we want to do is turn you into people like us, really, because that's better for you? What do we mean by everyone's welcome, loved as you are? How do you
Well,
see
I think that is a
out?
challenge for us, isn't it? That we are loved as we are, but in some ways Jesus loves us too much to leave us as we are. But I don't think that means that he changes everything about us.
He's not trying to change us into prototype Christians who are
No, I think he just wants us to be
heterosexual straight people who are very pious. That's not his
yes,
model at all.
no. I'm just looking at our notice board, and there's a quote on there that I wrote about a year ago, 18 months ago, and it says, "Be who God intended you to be, and you will set the world on fire." So it's about being ourselves, welcoming everybody as people that Jesus would have loved, that Jesus does love.
So I'm thinking, this is... Hello people, this is a cue for a song. We sometimes, place great store, we're not in churches at the moment, and things like communion are very, they're just not really doable at the moment. And for some people, church is all about the communion, the Eucharist. But there is that sense that I quite often have, where, okay, I've had the bread, which is the body of Jesus, and then the wine, which is like the blood of Jesus, and these are very symbolic things, and communion is a very symbolic and meaningful act for many people. But there's that bit, and so what? And what now? And we're going to have a song which you're going to sing for us called "Meet with Me," which is really about, I've eaten your body, I've drunk of your blood, but I need to meet with you. That's the yearning of our hearts, really, isn't it? And when Jesus encounters those women, and for example this woman who's been bleeding for 15 years, he meets her right in that moment. Shall we sing that song and pray around that? Do you want to cue us up for that?
Yep, yes. So I'm going to begin our time of prayer by reading a passage from a book by Rob Bell. Rob Bell is a Christian writer who has a way of just reinterpreting the gospel stories, just making me see my faith in a different way. And this is from a book called Drops Like Stars, which is all about suffering. And I'm going to just read this as a way of going into our prayer time. Several years ago, I was in Rwanda, meeting with a group of women who have AIDS, when I began to hear all sorts of noises coming from next door. At first, it sounded like someone was setting up a drum set, and then I started to hear singing. When our meeting was over, around noon, I went over to see what was going on. I came around the corner and found myself in a large room packed with people singing and dancing as if it were the last groove on earth, hundreds of them, swaying and clapping and moving. When I asked my guide what this was, he replied, "Having nothing and yet possessing everything." David Letterman had the musician Warren Zevon on his show soon after Zevon found out he had cancer. Letterman asked him, "From your perspective, do you know something about life that maybe I don't know?" Warren Zevon answered, "I know how much you're supposed to enjoy every sandwich." Sometimes what happens to us when we suffer is that we become open to the mercy and grace and gratitude and gift and appreciation and joy that are always around us all the time, even in a sandwich. So let's just pray for people we know who are suffering at this time, and also people who feel marginalised from church, who don't feel that they would be welcome in church for whatever reason. Let's just bring those two things before our Father in heaven, that he will meet them wherever they are and that they will feel loved, just as the woman who was bleeding for 15 years was loved and had her life changed by touching Jesus. Let's pray.
Meet with me.
Meet with me. Meet with me again, my Lord. My Lord. Meet with me. Meet with me again, my Lord. My Lord. I take and eat of your body. I take and drink of your blood. Now I need your love to fill me up. I take and eat of your body. I take and drink of your blood. Now I need your love to fill me up. Meet with me. Meet with me again, my Lord. My Lord. Meet with me. Meet with me again, my Lord. My Lord. I take and eat of your body. I take and drink of your blood. Now I need your love to fill me up. I take and eat of your body. I take and drink of your blood. Now I need your love to fill me up. And I need your touch. I need to know you're near. Need to hear your love song sweet and clear. Sue and Ian asked me to have a think about one of the women in the New Testament who had had their lives touched by Jesus and kind of what that meant to me. And I had quite a long thought because there's quite a few women that have been involved with Jesus in the New Testament. But the one that really I think resonates with me is actually his mother, Mary. You know, from the start, she didn't hesitate but accept, you know, God's challenge to her to bring up his son. And I can't begin to imagine what it must have been like bringing up the Son of God, looking after him when he was a little boy, teaching him, and then watching him as he found his ministry, and then latterly watching him go to his fate. And throughout all of that, she never seemed to appear to lose her faith. And it just makes me think that, you know, Jesus is just as much in our lives as he was in hers, and that he's with us every single step of the way. And we should, you know, consider how we can make sure that we're aware that he's in our lives always.
Thanks, Varian, for your thoughts about Mary and what it was like to be the mother of Jesus. I expect we've all got a favourite Bible character, a favourite female Bible character, either from the Old Testament or from the New Testament. If you'd like to tell us about one of your favourite characters, just get in touch and we'll include it in a future refresh. Now, we've asked Emily McGrath, who many of you will remember from when we started Refresh 5 years ago. She was one of the founder members and she's now moved to Bristol. But we got in touch with her and we asked her to just write something that we could use in this Refresh service. And she's written a poem about what she's noticed about how women are treated in the church. This is what she came up with.
The day we heard the news, my parents were elated. They whispered excitedly, and they could not believe their good fortune that such experience was coming to helm their church. Don't tell anyone, my father said, because some people are very upset. Their elation was mirrored by an anger and confusion that others felt. And as she settled into our Anglo-Catholic bastion, which would nevertheless come to champion women priests, as children we heard other stories, of friends who had abandoned her, of those who said her presence defiled the altar. But to us, she seemed much the same as the one from before. For the Sabbath, my mother has cooked the food and brought the bread. Now she lights the candles, and for a moment there is hush before the intake of breath. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who brings light out of darkness and whom we honour with these lights. Representation is important, but at this Christian festival only one of the speakers who speaks on the main stage is a woman, except the wives of some of the men. On my gap year, I work in a church, and once I go to a meeting of the local evangelical church leaders. All of them are white, middle-aged men, and I wonder if their congregations are as homogeneous. Then I share an opinion, and I am told that I do not understand. She is tireless. She moves around the church after the service, packing up the children's work and speaking with each family, with all the children who she sees. She is tireless, and she welcomes them. Vicky Beeching, Barbara Brown-Taylor, Nadia Botts-Weber, Sarah Miles, Rachel Held-Evans, they are prophets. Sometimes it is hard to tell, but they are there. And their stories speak of negotiating spaces and challenging practices, of treading the line and carefully treading across the line to see what might be possible. The midwives, who told the Pharaoh that the problem was he didn't understand how Jewish bodies worked, that labour is just quicker, and that's why the boys were still being born. Ruth and Naomi, who navigated a system of benefits and codes and supported each other when they were grieving to build a new life. The woman who challenged Jesus about the way that society oppressed her. The woman who touched Jesus because she was marked as unclean by the natural process of her body. The women who were trusted to tell the news of the risen Jesus, and the men who fact-checked them. These are empowering stories, and these are the stories that reflect women that I know. We stand in a neat line of twos in matching white albs reminiscent of small angels while Bryony is sticking out her tongue, and we laugh until at the head of the line Vicky hushes us with the seriousness of an 11-year-old who is in charge. I am 9. We are pioneers. The first female choristers at Lincoln Cathedral. After 750 years of history, we are writing a new story. We are breaking the mould. We are also standing behind a pillar, so we actually can't see that much, but we know that it is the before kick-off prayer as the hush, the quiet hush of holiness descends amongst the gathered priests and canons, and that is why we have been directed here, out of the sight lines, in case we remind anyone of our existence during the sacred space of prayer. To be fair, it is the early days, the teething days, the days when consternations must still be smoothed and angry shouts linger long after final decisions have been taken, and the pillar is the price we pay for shaking up the status quo. I'm not sure if I minded, if I peeked to see what we were missing, or if I knew exactly what the fuss was all about. I didn't stay long. My pioneer status short-lived, I moved on, and for a while it was a joke, the currency of irony that my once female presence had been so offensive that I had been hidden to avoid polluting prayer. I wander back to these memories. I think that it was the first time in church that I was aware I was a girl, and that translated into not the same as, less than, limits, and a much worse view, and I wonder what that says to a 9-year-old. Now, I idly look at the website for a moment and I gasp as I think it is a picture of us pioneers, but it isn't. It is today, sticking out their tongues just the same as they lean into the cloisters they look at home and fit within the ancient stone, still writing our story after 23 years.
So that brings us to the end of this month's Refresh. Thanks very much for being with us. It's been great to have you on board. Thanks to Sue and to Varian and to Emily for their contributions. We'll see you again next month, perhaps online, perhaps back in church, maybe a bit of both. Let's see how that goes. We're going to finish with a song written by Andy Flanagan, which reminds us that it's a complicated world. Some people really struggle. We've been looking at women in the Bible, some of whom have had a hard time. Some women continue to have a hard time within church. This is a song that reminds us that if we're blessed, and we know that we're blessed, then that's a great thing. But God wants to bless us for a purpose, and the purpose is to pass His blessing on to others. So let's sing Bring Heaven to Earth.
Bring heaven to earth, Lord. Bring peace where there's fear. Bring life where there's death, Lord. Bring joy in these tears. Bring love where there's lust, Lord. Bring hope where there's pain. Bring rest where there's chaos. Bring faith where there's fame. You invite us to partner with you to see your kingdom come. We are blessed to bless our world in peace, and we are loved to love where love is known. We are changed to be the change you promised. We are free to be your hands, oh God. Bring home to the homeless, bring keys to the chain, bring worth to the purchased, and touch to the shade. Bring flesh from your word, Lord, bring truth where there's spin, bring risk where there's safety, and grace where there's sin. In the broken we shall see restored the image of our King. We are blessed to bless the world in pieces. We are loved to love where love is not. We are changed to be the change you promised. We are free to be your hands, oh God. Lord, we cry out to you, change the atmosphere, breathe new life in all who gather here. Lord, we cry out to you, change the atmosphere, breathe new life in all who gather here. Bring justice to profit, bring patience to growth, bring wisdom to progress, like food for the soul. Bring freedom from debt, Lord, an end to excess. Bring closer your kingdom by quiet success. May we grow in the knowledge of you through every heart and face. We are blessed to bless the world in pieces. We are loved to love where love is not. We are changed to be the change you promised. We are free to be your hands, oh God. We are